Welcome to the lesson 1B of the lesson 1 lecture. So, on the previous videos, we showed how we can be able to organize our modules for our application, right? So, here in this lesson, we're going to show how we can run our application, our default application, right? So, on the lesson 2, we're going to do other stuff like focusing on the HTML design. Okay, now, before we start, it's very necessary for you guys to understand the basic Python function, right? So we all know that Python function, right, is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task. So it allows you to organize your code into logical chunks that can be called whenever needed. So going back to our code here, right, we're going to write a simple function, right? So to write a simple function in Python, you just go def, right? So let's assume that we want to write a function called addition, right? So we want to write a function called addition. So without a parameter, so I will without a parameter. So I'll click on this, right? So I have my let's assume we have a variable called a or a container that stores that keeps 6 8, right? So we have another container which is b or a variable that stores 7, right? So if I'm to return them, so we have return a plus b, right? So it means that I'm returning a plus b, which is 6 plus 7, right? So if I run this, it should give me, which is print. I will call the function, right? I will call the function. So if I run this, let me go to partial. So if I run this, it should give me 13, right? Now, let's also define another function with a parameter, right? With parameters, because this is statically defined because you're actually passing the numbers inside within the function. So what if we want to pass it outside the function when the function is being called outside? So what we do, remove this, right? We'll pass the parameter, we'll pass it like this. So the variables will pass like this as a parameter, like which is a and b, right? So then at the end, we're returning a plus b. So when we are printing, right, so we can assign values to a, which value for a can be 500 and value for b can be 435, right? So if I print this again, let me print it again. So it gives me 935, right? So you can see we can dynamically pass our numbers to these because this function, what this function is basically doing is addition, right? So we can dynamically pass any numbers to this, right? And it does the work for us. So that is a simple way to define a function. So let's look at the second part, yeah? Because this is a Flux web application, so we need to understand what we call the Flux function, the factory function in Flux. So in Flask, the function createApp is a commonly used as a factory function to create an instance of the Flask application. Now, the factory function is where we can be able to do all our configuration, right? Database configuration and any other configurations we want to do for this application. You can see this pattern allows for better organizations of the application and is particularly useful for larger applications or when using different configurations like development, testing, and production, right? So let's create a factory function, right? So I will remove this. I believe that you guys understood how we can create a simple function because we'll be using this in this class, right? So now let's go. Remember when we were creating our app folder, right? We have a global init.py. Remember, every modules here have this init.py, which we have not set up. And I said I will explain this in detail when we start um, communicating with each modules here, right? So now let's set up our factory function. So we'll set our factory function in this global init.py that is outside these modules, but it's inside this app folder. You can see how it's outside here, right? So I'll click on this. So remember in the last previous videos we installed Flux, right? So I will call the Flux we installed this from Flux, right? So I will import the function called Flux, right? So you can see, okay, now you can see this. So what I will do here is to define my factory function. Now this is how we define a factory function. It's all lowercase create app, so there's no name. So this is a name, right? So right, which is a column. I click enter. So the next thing to do here is we need to create a new instance of our Flask class and assign that variable to and assign it to a app variable. Yeah. So let me call this the app variable or a container. So I have to create an instance of my Flask class. So how do I do that? So I have to call this Flask here, which I've import. I have to call it here, right? Open brackets, then the underscore twice, one, two, then the name, then one, two, right? So let me explain this. Now, this name is a special Python variable that refers to the name of the current module, right? So the script that this script we're currently running, right? So now I've initialized this. So the next thing to do here is to define my roots, right? So I have my app.root, right? I will explain this, don't worry. App.root then slash, right? So now this app.root in Flask is a root operator that defines the URL path that is associated with a specific view functions in your Flask application. Now, the basic thing about this decorator is that it tells the Flask, right, when someone accesses the root URL, like this one, this slash here. So when someone accesses the root URL, so Flask should call the function immediately below the decorator. So each of the decorators will be using here in Flask. Each of this is a decorator, right? This is the character. So this is the root, right? So each of these we'll be using here have a function under it, below it. So when we execute this part, let me show you guys examples so I understand what I'm trying to say. Now, assuming that you have a domain name like this, so when you execute a domain name, right, if you're using Flask, so the first thing it does is look at this decorator here, right? Look at this root because this root is slash, right? It looks at this root at first instance and then execute the function that's under it, right? Because of the slash symbols. That's what it does at first. So when you execute the entire application, right? So doing when we execute the entire application, we want our application to redirect to the index.html page. But we need to define function for that in Python function. So we have a def, right? You can say under it, right? It's the function is associated. It's always every function in this Flask we have a decorator except the functions will be defining that you can call in a decorator in the other functions that has a decorator, right? Which we'll look at that later in the future. So I have a function like this. So the name of my function can be index. There's no parameter, right? So now this index is just doing simple things. So I want this index function to return to redirect to my index.html page. So what I just need to do in fact is I'll do it. So we have return. Then we have our called render template and it's lowercase lower render template, right? So I have so inside this, right? Inside this, we have an index.html, right? You can see this render template is showing a yellow line here, showing that there's an error here, right? You can see render template is not defined. So we need to define it because it's part of a function inside the Flux library or extension too. So I have to call it render template, right? So it goes out, right? So you can see how I define this default function inside this application function, right? Inside this function, this factory here, right? Like this function factory here in Flux, right? So the next thing I'll do is to return the app. So I'm done with for now I'm done with the factory function, right? And this is the function which by default it looks at this route when we execute the entire application and then redirects to the index.html page. Now in this place here, we have not actually created our index.html page. So what we'll do, remember in last previous videos, we have modules with their templates each inside these modules here. So what we'll do here, we'll create an external template file outside these modules that will have this index.html files so that in our next video, this index.html will be our parent page and every other page will be inheriting from this index.html, which I will show you guys how to do that, right? So what I'll do here, I'll just highlight this app folder, right? So I'll click on this to create the template folder, templates, right? So it must be templates like this, right? It must be templates like this, lowercase. So inside this template folder, I will create my index.html, right? Index.html. So the faster way to actually start writing your HTML, right? So I'll just, if you're using Windows, so use Shift 1, right? Shift 1, then please enter. So you can see how it comes up automatically. So I can put my title, which is student group course management ma- management system, right? So let me just put something here. Let's put an header, which is H1, which we'll explain in next video when we start doing our HTML. So I'll have welcome to web development. Okay, so we are done with the we're not done yet, but this is just an intro of our index.html, right? So you can see how I've defined it. So there's one more folder we need to create outside this app folder, which we call the static folder. Now this static folder, what it does, this static folder will contains this is where we'll store our CSS file, and this is where we'll store our JavaScript file and other images we'll be using for this application. So I've created a static folder. You can see it's outside the module here. It's outside each module. It's just standalone here because every module here will use the CSS file inside the static folder. Also, we use the JavaScript file inside the static folder. Right. So inside the static folder, I'll create another folder called JS, which we have all our JavaScript files, and I'll create another folder here called CSS. Right? So we have already set up our complete application like this. So remember on the init file, we have already created our factoring function. Have already created a default function where we execute this application. This is the first thing it does. It redirects us to the index.html. So now on the app folder, right, which executes the entire application, we have to like write our code for that, right? That's our code for that. So what we need to do, we have to import our factory function, which is from app, right? Import the create app function, right? Import this function that is inside here, which is located inside this app folder. Please remember that this app.py, which is executing the whole application, is outside this app folder, right? You can see it's alone outside, so that you won't have any issue when you're running your application, right? So now I have a variable, right, that I will call the function here. So I have a variable called app, so I'm passing this function, the entire function to app because I want to run it. So now we need to run the entire application. So if the name, you can see double underscore, is equal to our main, right? So let's run the application, which is this app now, this app dot run, right? So we can run it like this, it will work, but since we'll be working on this periodically, like in real time, so I want, even if we're making changes, we don't need to stop the application automatically. The changes will reflect automatically. So we need what we call debug. We'll pass the debug here. Debug is equal to true, right? So let's assume that you want your team to be able to access your web application when it runs. So you have to have what we call host, right? So I will show you guys that now before we end the class. So let me just put 0.0 for now because I don't actually have my IP address in my head. So now which port do they want to access? Let's use 5,000, which is by default, right? 5,000. So when I run this now I'm done with this, right? I'm done with this. So it's time to run a Flask application, right? So to run it, to use the pi after pi. So it has run, so it's running on a URL part of this, right? So I'll copy this. You can see it's running on my local host of 127.0.0.1 5000. That is by default. Then my IP, let's find out. Let me go to my command prompt, cmd. Why isn't it coming up? Okay, it's coming up. It has come. Oh, how many times? Shit. How many times I type this? So let me find out my IP address, ipconfig. So let me type it again. I'm not connected to any internet, but at least it's showing me by default, it's showing me my IP here, which is 10.8.75.25, then column 5000. So anyone I choose to run, let's try to, if I copy this one here, right, then let me place it here. You can see this is my IP, this is the port 5000. Now it has said it has run welcome to web development. So when we run this domain, right? When we run this URL part, automatically it executes that route because that route is a base route. That is the base route. So on our next videos, we're going to be creating more routes, right? But that route by default is a base route. That's why it executes the function under the base route, which is welcome to web development. So we can start designing this index.html, right? We can start designing the index.html, start assigning layout to this and make it final in our next video, right? So you can see this part works. You can see when you access, even if you are using a phone or a laptop, right? If we are on the same internet, if we connect to the same if we connect to the same internet or on the same router, so when you access my IP, this IP here with the port 5000, you will definitely see this. So that's what I want you guys to do. But remember, this your port 5000, you need to set the rule on your firewall if you're using the Windows operating system. How you need to do that is just to go to the control panel. I don't know why this thing's taking time. So what you need to do is to go to the control panel, which okay, it has opened here. You have to go to the control panel here, right? You can see. So when you go to the control panel, then we can, sorry, okay. We go to the security, right? So now you can see here, this is the window firewall. We have to like create rules. So we click on this, right? So what you need to do is just to create rule, right? Is just to create a rule to assign to be so that we can be able to have access to port 5000, right? That's what you need to do, right? So just to create a rule, you can see when I create advanced settings, right? So you click on inbound rule. So when you click on inbound rules, so you click on new rule, right? So when you click on new rule, so you select the port, right? So you click on next, right? So you should be on TCP. Then you just assign the port that you want other system to listen to, which is port 5000, right? So when you click on this, you click on next, right? So that it is done. I've already done that here. I've already set the rule here, right? So I don't want to set it again. So that is how it's done. So when someone accesses this application, another system, right, they can be able to see this application as long as they are accessing this IP. Definitely, they will see this, right? So that is what I want you guys to do. The teams I want you guys to do. So when you create an application, each team should be able to access their own application. So that when we come on next class, we can be able to see how it works, and you guys have understood the first step on how you can be able to access application from the server, right, directly from somebody's system. Right, this is just an easy way. Then later we can learn other ways to do that. So thank you and God bless. If you have any question, feel free to ask. So now this is what I want you guys to do for lesson 1. So when you achieve that, I'll tell you guys what next to do for lesson 2. So thank you. I hope you guys understand this video is very interesting. So just follow it up and God bless you.